Okay, good morning everyone. Shalom Aleichem, Bruchim Haba, and we're continuing in Mishnah Berura. Siman Kuf Lamed Ches. Siman Kuf Lamed Ches. The Mechaber said in Seif Aleph that if you read the Torah, you should not leave over less than 3 Pesukim because of the people who leave early. And they're going to say the next Oila only read 2 Pesukim. Likewise, you should not begin less than 3 Pesukim into the Parsha, because those who come late, they're going to say you only read 2 Pesukim in the previous Aliyah. And the Ramah says, Ein ve'ein chiluk bein Parsha pechusa l'sesuma. There's no chiluk between an open Parsha and a sealed Parsha. U'parsha she'eino rak shnei Pesukim moter l'shayim batchila u'l'hafsik sham. What about a Parsha that's only 2 Pesukim? Then you're allowed to leave it over and to stop there. Let's see what that means. Mutter l'shayir batchila. Roitzalomer l'shayir eitzel ha-parsha. That is, let's say a Parsha is only 2 Pesukim, and you're going to stop right before that Parsha. So maybe somebody who leaves early, sheyoimru, they're going to say, well, maybe in the next Oila we'll only read 2 Pesukim. Vein lachash misham hayoitzin sheyomer sha'akorei acharav lo yikra ela shnei Pesukim. D'chol she'ein royin shinoi lo yichai shinan. Because if they don't see something unusual, we're not suspicious. D'davka im yaniach shnei Pesukim b'parsha shemasayim ba. It's only if you stop 2 Pesukim left at the end of the Parsha. So people are wondering, why didn't you finish up the Parsha? Why do you leave over 2 Pesukim? To stop at the end of a Parsha, and the next Parsha is only 2 Pesukim, people are not going to ask questions. You didn't do anything unusual. You stopped at a reasonable spot. However, if you stop 2 Pesukim short, people are going to wonder. That's a shinoi. Zehav a shinoi, maybe l'dechshad ma she'en kein b'shagoymer ha-parsha sho'ima ba'en kan shinoi. As opposed to if you finish the Parsha that you're standing in, there's no unusual activity. V'adin shemuto likroi ha-parsha hazois b'tzeirov ma she'kar lefanea. You could also read these 2 Pesukim and then stop right after it. And we're not worried people are going to say, oh, the last Oila only read 2 Pesukim. We're not afraid somebody who comes late will say, people will only say that if you start after 2 Pesukim into a Parsha. It's only in a regular case, it's only in a different case where you stop in middle of the Parsha. Chayshinan, we're worried. The Yoimru HaNechnasin, we're concerned that someone who enters will say, Shemistama lo yikara ela shnei Pesukim. Probably this Aliyah only read 2 Pesukim. In other words, if you start 2 Pesukim into the Parsha, then we're worried that the people who came late will say, you only read 2 Pesukim into this Parsha. However, you could end off an Aliyah after a Parsha that's only 2 Pesukim, and we're not worried that Nechnasim are going to say that the previous Aliyah only read 2 Pesukim. Only when you start 2 Pesukim into the Parsha are we going to say that. Otherwise, the latecomer is going to say, why did they read from here and they didn't complete the whole Parsha? As opposed to where you've completed a complete Parsha, which was 2 Pesukim, people are not going to say that's all you read. They're going to say you stopped there because that was the end of the Parsha. However, there are those who are machmer about this, not to do it l'chadchila. The El Yarabba is Mesupik, the Pri Chadash is Machmer. However, in the Kriya of Rosh Chodesh, we're not going to be Mishaneh from the Minhag Olam that they read Uviyayim HaShabbos for Shlishi, but lechatchila you should be choishesh for this lechatchila. What does that mean? Let me see. In Parshas Pinchas, let's see what we read. Let's say on Rosh Chodesh, we read Vayidaber Shem Moshe Leimar, Tzaves Bnei Yisrael, V'amarta, that's 3 Pesukim. Then we go back, we read V'amarta, Es HaKevez Echad, V'asir Seifa, that is 3 Pesukim. Oilas Tamid, V'niskoi, V'es HaKevez Echad, and then we say Uv'yayim HaShabbos. Now, that means we're ending off an aliyah after a parsha of 2 Pesukim. So even though there are those who are machmir not to do that, on Rosh Chodesh we do that. We do say the 2 Pesukim of Uviyam HaShabbos, because that's the minhag. So l'charchil you shouldn't do this. Ki im b'kriyas Rosh Chodesh, that we end off the shlishi of a 2 Pesukim parsha. Aval kishakorim Parshas Hashavua b'seder Pinchas, when we read the regular Parsha of the week, ein lahafsik achar Uviyam HaShabbos l'chila. You shouldn't stop after Uviyam HaShabbos. We don't. We stop after Uvrashei Chodshechem. Uchai gavna b'shari mekomos kisheira Parsha ketana. L'chadchila, if for whatever reason you have to make a hosafa, keep this in mind. You should not make a hosafa after a Parsha that's only 2 Pesukim. Kasav HaMagen Avram, ima parshi be'emtza pasuk. Let's say there's a parsha in the middle of the pasuk, going betchilas Parshas Pinchas, but pasuk vayihi acharei hamagefa, where that's in the middle of the pasuk, it's the end of the parsha. Sheyesh piska be'emtza pasuk. Mutter l'sayim ba'pasuk hasamachlei. You could end off in the adjoining pasuk, because we're not worried that somebody leaves early is going to say, oh, he's only going to read the half a pasuk coming up, which is a whole parsha. Everybody knows everybody knows you don't end off in the middle of pasuk. So we're not worried about that. But by the way, it does sound like, if let's say you have a parsha that's 1 pasuk, you have like in Mishpatim, where you have a psukim that it's a pei or a samach after 1 pasuk. You should not stop an aliyah after that pasuk. Let's see in Mishpatim. Let's try. Yeah, let's say it's the end of a parsha. You have many psukim. Can't stop there. Unless you say it's only 2 psukim, you don't stop, because maybe people will think you lane 2 psukim, but maybe 1 pasuk everybody knows you're allowed, you would never lane. But here the Mishnah Berura is saying everybody knows you don't lane a half a pasuk, but maybe 1 pasuk. Here's my question, because if you look in Shlishi in Mishpatim, there, the shlishi is before the pasuk ki yaver ish sada oicherem, and that next pasuk is a parsha. So when the Mishnah Berura here says l'chatchila, he says v'yesh machmirim b'zeh she'en la'asos ken l'chatchila ki im b'kriyas Rosh Chodesh, that we lane uv'yayim HaShabbos as shlishi, and that meaning we stop before Uviyayim HaShabbos. 1 second. Actually, what does the Mishnah Berura mean? We lane Uviyayim HaShabbos as shlishi. We start, shlishi is oilas tamid. Oilas tamid is 3 psukim. I guess the issue is, you're stopping at the end of 2 psukim, you're not to stop at the end of 2 Pesukim. People are going to think that's all you read. Is this chashash of stopping only don't stop after 2 Pesukim? Or how about stopping before 2 Pesukim? Why are we worried about yotzim or only nechnasim? I'm just pointing out that in Parshas Mishpatim there are aliyos. Oh, it actually it works both ways. Shlishi is before one pasuk of a parsha. Chamishi is after one pasuk of a parsha. So that seems to show that Bizman Hazeh we are not careful about one pasuk. So even though the Mishnah Berura says we're not careful about a half a pasuk, but it seems like we're also not careful about one pasuk. Do you understand what I'm saying? If you look in Parshas Mishpatim, the stoppings are both before one pasuk of a parsha and after one pasuk of a parsha. So, okay, let's see the end of the Rama. This is also a very interesting point that there are a lot of exceptions to. You should always have kavanah to begin laning with something good and end with something good. Says the Mishnah Berura, Sivkatan Hey, B'davar Tov. What is Davar Tov meaning? Shel Yisrael for Jews. The Tovas Abigilam in a Kriya Tova. What's good for idolaters is not called good. Ra means for Yisrael. The Magen Avram brings the proof that we know that on Rosh Hashanah we lane Zechroinos, we're now to lane Pesukim of Peranios Li Yisra, but Loiv de Gilulim we're allowed to. Kasa b'sefer Chasidim Siman Tavshet Ayin. Yizar HaChazan Shlo Yikra L'mishu Ivar Pesach Parshas Avaras HaShavar. The Gabbai should not call up for an aliyah someone who's blind in the parsha of Averas HaShavar. Oy L'misha Roishai Nesek Parshas Nesakim. Someone has a bald spot in the Parshas Nesakim. V'lo Yikra L'misha Chashed Al Arayos B'Parshas Arayos. V'chein B'chol Davar V'Davar. Ve'in L'chazan Lachshev L'varch Echad B'Shas Brachos. Oy L'kala B'Shas Shikori HaKlalis. The Baal Koirei should not think, I'm leaning this Yivarechacha, I have in mind to be Mavarech Ploini, or to be Makalel Ploini. V'atam shetzach sheyeh kavnasa likrois b'Torah l'shma. The reason is, you need to have kavanah. So in other words, when you're laning, you're not to think of family members, or friends, or relatives, or enemies. You have to read the Torah l'shma, and not for any machshava zara. V'yisayim b'davar tov, v'ein l'sayim b'mi she'asa ma'asera. So I have a question on that. If you look in Parshas, one of the Parshios ends L'taharoi oy l'tamoi. Shmini ends Bein achai anechel, so bein achai shaloi sei achel. Is that okay? Tazria ends, this is the big one, L'taharoi oy l'tamoi. L'taharoi oy l'tamoi. How can it end l'tamoi? I thought you're now to end b'davara. No, but the Parshios are this is the Parsha. Parshios are already in the Medrash. So I think the Rugged Shavar says from the pasuk L'taroi L'tamoi that from the fact that it says L'taroi or L'tamoi we learn out Safek Tahar. If it would have said the other way, Safek would be Tamei. So because we learn out a Davar Toiv from the positioning of L'tamoi, it's considered ending b'Davar Toiv. Okay.
Recording stopped.